Hello, friends. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Here, I share a brand new story every day. If you enjoy my videos, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's dive into today's story. When I was 15 years old, I was a typical high school student, enjoying my carefree days and spending time with friends. My father, an architect, was overseeing a large construction project at a site just outside of Whispering Pines, a small town where we lived. Every weekend, my family would visit the site with my dad, exploring the area while he checked on the progress of the work. One warm Sunday in late August, we accompanied my father to the construction site. Nearby, there was a serene lake surrounded by tall, swaying pines, and we decided to spend the day there, basking in the tranquil beauty of the place. The sun reflected off the water, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves, making it a perfect day for a picnic. We returned home that evening feeling relaxed and happy, and even treated ourselves to dinner at a local diner before calling it a night. The following day, I woke up feeling feverish and weak. The high fever prevented me from going to school, and my mother assumed it was just a seasonal illness. But as the days passed, my condition worsened. The fever persisted, defying the medications prescribed by the doctor. Strangely, I felt somewhat better during the daytime, but as evening approached, the fever would spike again, becoming unbearable by midnight. My body ached all over, and the pain in my legs was so intense that I could barely move. This mysterious illness continued for nearly 2 weeks, and my parents grew increasingly concerned. All the medical tests came back normal, yet I was getting weaker and more exhausted by the day. One night, while I was sleeping, I suddenly began crying out in distress. My mother, alarmed by my cries, rushed to my side, asking what was wrong. But to her shock, I was still asleep. And what was even more baffling was that I was speaking in a language she didn't understand, a language I had never spoken before. Panicked, my mother called my father, who hurried home from the construction site. They listened as I muttered incomprehensible words in my sleep, my voice filled with sorrow and anguish. Unsure of what to do, my parents decided to keep this strange occurrence to themselves, fearing what others might think. But the nightly episodes continued, and they became more desperate to find a solution. One night, as my cries echoed through the house, our elderly neighbor, Mr. Thompson, who worked as the night watchman at my father's construction site, heard the commotion and came over to check on us. To our surprise, Mr. Thompson recognized the language I was speaking. It was an old dialect of Cherokee, a language I had never been exposed to. With his help, my parents finally began to understand the terrifying truth. Through Mr. Thompson's interpretation, they learned that the voice speaking through me was that of a woman who had met a tragic end. She revealed that she had been brutally murdered by her husband, a laborer who worked at the construction site. The man had killed both her and their young daughter over a petty argument about money, and he had buried their bodies in the very spot where my father's new building was being constructed. The woman's spirit was restless, her soul trapped in the earthly realm because of the injustice she had suffered. She pleaded with my parents, begging them to recover her and her daughter's remains and give them a proper burial with all the traditional rites. She also requested that they perform a special ceremony for her daughter, one that would symbolize the wedding she would never have. My father, shaken by the revelation, promised to fulfill her requests, but pleaded with the spirit to leave me alone. The spirit speaking through me agreed, explaining that she never intended to harm anyone. She only sought peace for herself and her child. From that day on, my health began to improve and the fever subsided. But the experience had left me traumatized, and I became fearful of being alone, especially after dark. Although the spirit had promised to leave me in peace, a sense of unease lingered in our home. Days turned into weeks, and as the construction project progressed, my father became consumed by his work. In the midst of his busy schedule, he forgot about the promise he had made to the spirit. Then, one afternoon, as I was walking home from school, I was hit by a car. The accident wasn't severe, but it was enough to shake us all. That night, the spirit returned, more furious than ever, her voice filled with anger and pain. She reminded my father of the promise he had broken and warned him that if he didn't fulfill his vows, the consequences would be dire. Terrified, my father and Mr. Thompson immediately went to the construction site that very night. They dug at the spot the spirit had indicated, and to their horror, they unearthed two skeletons, the remains of the woman and her daughter. They performed the necessary rituals, giving the bodies a proper burial and holding a small ceremony for the daughter, as the spirit had requested. As they completed the rites, the night air seemed to grow lighter, and a sense of calm settled over the site. When they returned home, they found me in a deep, peaceful sleep. The spirit spoke one last time, thanking my father for setting her free. She promised that her soul and her daughter's soul would finally be at rest, and that we would never hear from her again. I have no memory of the events that transpired during those terrifying weeks. My parents later told me everything: the cries, the strange language, the desperate pleas of the spirit. Even now, years later, we honor the spirit's memory by donating clothes and food to local girls in need every year. My father made it a tradition, a way to remember the promise he made and the lives that were lost. We often hear stories about vengeful spirits and haunted places, but this experience taught me that not all spirits seek to harm. Sometimes they simply want to be heard, to find peace, and to move on from the pain that bound them to this world. The haunting of Whispering Pines was one such story, a story of tragedy, redemption, and ultimately the peace that comes with setting things right. It had been years since Alice Harper returned to her hometown of Willowbrook, a place nestled in the heart of New England. As a child, the creek near her family's home was her sanctuary, where she spent countless afternoons exploring, dreaming, and playing. After moving back a few months ago, Alice had been meaning to revisit the creek, but something always seemed to come up. Today, however, felt different. Something deep within her urged her to return to that cherished place. The Willowbrook Creek ran through a public garden, home to the quaint Willowbrook Community Center and library. The library was a beloved landmark, whispered to be haunted by the ghost of a woman who roamed its old, creaking halls. As children, Alice and her friends often traded stories of ghostly sightings, though she had never encountered the spirit herself. Yet the stories persisted, and Alice couldn't help but wonder if there was any truth to them. When Alice finally reached the creek, she was taken aback. The once open stretch of water was now cordoned off by a wire fence, preventing easy access. Despite the changes, Alice's desire to reconnect with her childhood drove her to find an unfenced section. She clambered down the muddy embankment, feeling the familiar sensation of being watched. But this wasn't an ominous feeling. Rather, it felt protective, as if the creek itself was looking out for her. As Alice wandered along the creek, she mentally reached out to the trees, telepathically communicating with the ancient oaks and elms that had stood there long before her time. There was one tree in particular she was eager to see again, a mighty oak that had always been her favorite. To get there, she needed to pass by a small hill that had once been topped by a mud brick castle, a structure that had fueled many of her childhood fantasies. She had spent countless hours there, imagining herself as a queen ruling over a hidden kingdom. But as she approached the area, her heart sank. The hill was gone, the castle replaced by a new playground. The new structure was bright and modern, but it lacked the charm and mystery of the old castle. Disappointed, Alice continued her walk, her mind drifting back to a dream she had a few months prior, a dream where she explored a playground that seemed different yet familiar. In the dream, she had seen a flying fox, a bat-like decoration, perched on a wire. Now, standing by the new playground, Alice scanned the area for the flying fox but saw nothing. She felt a bit silly for even looking, especially with families nearby enjoying the day. She turned to leave when something caught her eye, a flash of yellow in the setting sun. Alice quickly grabbed her phone, hoping to capture the beautiful sunset filtering through the trees. As she took several photos, she noticed a small yellow dot in the center of each picture, something she hadn't seen with her naked eye. At first, she dismissed it as a lens flare, but as she reviewed the images, the dot seemed to move, as if it had a mind of its own. Intrigued and a little unnerved, Alice wondered if she had captured something more, a sprite, perhaps, or an intelligent observer hidden within the light. She had heard of water sprites in local folklore, but never given them much thought. But now, Looking at the photos, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden realization. The flying fox she had dreamt of was right there at the back of the playground, obscured from view unless you stood at a certain angle. The bat decoration looked cartoonish, almost like Casper the Ghost, but the resemblance to her dream was uncanny. If it wasn't for her love of sunsets, she would have missed it entirely. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Alice decided it was time to head home. She turned to walk back the way she came, but then a voice echoed in her mind, "Go the other way." It wasn't her own thought, but it felt as if it came from the forest itself. The voice was gentle yet insistent, urging her to take a different path. Following the mysterious guidance, Alice found herself walking up a long, steep hill. The climb was arduous, and she cursed the voice for leading her this way. But when she reached the top, she was rewarded with a view unlike any she had ever seen. The sunset was breathtaking. Vivid hues of green, blue, and pink surrounded the sun, which appeared darker, almost like an eclipse. For a brief moment, Alice stood in awe, adjusting her glasses to ensure she wasn't seeing things. But just as quickly as it had appeared, the vivid colors faded, and the sunset returned to its usual peachy tones. She shook her head, wondering if it was all a trick of the light. The next day, news spread that the aurora borealis had been visible from their part of the world, a rare event that had taken everyone by surprise. Alice realized she had witnessed it during her walk, and if she had taken her usual path, she would have missed the extraordinary sight entirely. Reflecting on her experience, Alice felt both blessed and bewildered. Who or what had guided her to that hill? Was it the same presence she felt at the creek, the one that seemed to watch over her? And what was the yellow dot in her photos? A mere lens flare or something more? As she pondered these questions, Alice felt a deep connection to the land, the trees, and even the unseen forces that seemed to guide her. She couldn't shake the feeling that her return to Willowbrook was meant to be, that the creek, the old oak, and even the missing hill held secrets waiting to be uncovered. And so she decided to return to the creek the next day, this time with a more open mind, ready to listen to the whispers of the trees and perhaps even encounter the enigmatic observer that had appeared in her photos. For in Willowbrook, where the past and present intertwined, anything seemed possible. In the weeks that followed, Alice continued her walks, each one revealing more about the land she once called home. The voice in the woods never returned, but the yellow light occasionally made an appearance, always in her photos, never seen directly. Whether it was a sprite, a guardian, or something else entirely, Alice couldn't say. But she no longer felt alone in Willowbrook, knowing that whatever it was, it meant her no harm. And as the seasons changed, so did Alice, finding peace and purpose in the place that had shaped her childhood. Willowbrook, with its mysterious creek, haunted library, and hidden secrets, had become her sanctuary once more, a place where the line between reality and the unknown blurred, offering endless possibilities for those willing to explore. I decided to take a break from my usual routine of managing air traffic control at the bustling city airport. The stress was beginning to take its toll, and a change of scenery felt necessary. My best friend, whom I'll refer to as Rachel, suggested we take a week-long drive to clear our heads. Rachel and I have always had a close, platonic relationship. She's like an older sister to me. We've known each other since I was 17, nearly 4 decades now, and our bond has only strengthened over the years. Rachel owns a charming little miniature schnauzer named Bella. You might remember Bella as the friendly dog often seen at the local church in the woods, a place that holds many fond memories for us. The three of us, Rachel, Bella, and I, love to go on adventures together, exploring the quieter, more mysterious corners of the world. One chilly June morning, with the air biting cold as it often gets in our part of the country, we decided to embark on a road trip through the winding roads of the Appalachian Mountains. Our destination was the small historic town of Silver Hollow, nestled in the heart of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Silver Hollow was a 6.5-hour drive from the city, but we were in no rush, eager to leave behind the noise and chaos of urban life. The drive was peaceful, the roads winding through dense forests and open meadows, interrupted only by the occasional stop for traffic control. Some of the controllers were people I knew from work, and we exchanged friendly waves. We arrived in Silver Hollow an hour later than expected, thanks to the traffic delays, and decided to spend the night at a quaint local inn, a place steeped in history with creaky floors and faded wallpaper that whispered stories of the past. The next morning, we set out to explore the town. It was late morning when we stumbled upon an old cemetery on the outskirts of Silver Hollow. The cemetery was in a state of disrepair, overgrown with weeds and vines, the headstones weathered and almost unreadable. It was a place forgotten by time, yet it held a strange, haunting beauty. The cemetery wasn't far from the main road, just a dusty, narrow path that led through a partially cleared forest. As we wandered through the graveyard, I couldn't help but wonder why it had been left untended. It was a fascinating place, with headstones dating back to the early 19th century, many of them so eroded by the elements that the names and dates were barely visible. Bella was having the time of her life, sniffing around the graves and chasing after the occasional bird or squirrel. We eventually found ourselves in what seemed to be a section reserved for children, judging by the size of the headstones. Many of them bore only a name and a year, most likely marking the graves of stillborn infants or children who had died young. It was a somber place, and the air felt heavy with the weight of untold stories. As I stood there, lost in thought, I suddenly felt a light tug on my jacket. It was as if a small hand was trying to get my attention. I turned around quickly, but there was no one there. I shrugged it off and continued walking, but then it happened again. A gentle, insistent tug on my coat. This time, I spun around immediately, but again, there was no one in sight. I know what you're thinking. It must have been the wind. But I swear there wasn't even the slightest breeze that day. The air was still and cold. This was no random gust. It felt deliberate, like a child playing a game of tag. Rachel noticed my sudden stops and turned to look at me with concern. "You okay?" she asked. "I don't know. I keep feeling something like someone's trying to get my attention," I replied, still puzzled. That's when we both noticed Bella behaving strangely. She was lying on her back, wagging her tail furiously as if someone was playing with her. Bella was usually a reserved dog, not one to get overly excited, so this behavior was out of character. She looked up at something or someone that we couldn't see, then rolled over and started barking happily. Rachel and I exchanged uneasy glances. "What's she doing?" Rachel asked, her voice tinged with both curiosity and concern. "I have no idea," I said, my mind racing with possibilities. "But it's almost like she's interacting with someone we can't see." A thought struck me. What if Bella was sensing something paranormal? I wasn't a ghost hunter, nor did I have any interest in becoming one, but this felt like a rare opportunity to explore the unknown. I suggested to Rachel that we let Bella lead the way to see if she could guide us to whatever or whoever was causing her unusual behavior. Rachel was hesitant at first, concerned for Bella's safety, but she eventually agreed. After all, we had to walk back through the cemetery to reach the car anyway, and it seemed harmless enough to indulge my curiosity. Bella trotted ahead, her nose to the ground, occasionally stopping to sniff at a particular headstone or patch of earth. We followed her down an overgrown path, passing by crumbling graves and ancient trees. Finally, she stopped in front of a small, weathered headstone, sitting down and looking up at us with her tail wagging slowly. Rachel knelt down and brushed away the leaves and dirt to read the inscription. "I think her name is Emma," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "She was only 7 years old when she died, in 1867. Rachel looked up at me, her eyes glistening with tears. "Such a short life. But why is Bella so drawn to her grave?" "Maybe Emma had a dog like Bella," I suggested, trying to make sense of it all. "Maybe she used to play with her dog in the same way." Bella continued to wag her tail as if in response to our conversation, then lay down beside the grave, her head resting on her paws. Rachel, moved by the moment, went off to find some flowers. She returned with a handful of wildflowers and gently placed them on Emma's grave. I unclipped Bella's collar and laid it on the headstone, a small token of our visit. As we stood there, a deep sense of peace washed over me. The air was still, the cemetery silent, except for the distant sound of birds chirping. I couldn't help but feel that Emma's spirit, if it was indeed present, was at peace too. Whatever had happened in her short life, she had found a friend in Bella, if only for a brief moment. We left the cemetery that day with a renewed sense of wonder and a belief that not all ghosts are malevolent. Some, like Emma, simply want to be remembered, to reach out and make a connection, however small. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about our experience at the cemetery. I did some research on the history of Silver Hollow and discovered that the town had once been a bustling mining community in the mid-1800s. Many families had moved there in search of fortune, but life was harsh and diseases like cholera and typhoid were rampant. Emma, it seemed, was one of the many children who had succumbed to illness during that time. Rachel and I returned to Silver Hollow a few months later, this time with a bouquet of fresh flowers. We visited Emma's grave, and once again Bella seemed to sense something, wagging her tail and lying down beside the headstone. We spent a quiet hour there, talking softly and remembering the little girl we had never met but felt we knew. As we drove back to the city, I realized that our trip to Silver Hollow had been more than just a getaway. It had been a journey of discovery, not just of a forgotten town and its history, but of the thin veil that separates the living from the dead. I now believe that some spirits linger, not out of malice or unfinished business, but out of a simple desire to be acknowledged, to feel a connection to the world they once knew. And so, whenever I feel overwhelmed by the noise and chaos of life, I think of Emma and the peaceful cemetery in Silver Hollow. I know that there's more to this world than what we can see, and that sometimes, if we're lucky, we get a glimpse of it. In the heart of the quaint old town of Maple Grove, nestled in the northeastern United States, stood a collection of historic homes, each with its own story etched into the weathered bricks and faded paint. Among these ancient dwellings, one particular house had gained a reputation for its eerie past, a reputation that would only deepen in the mid-1980s. The house had always been shrouded in a veil of mystery, with whispers of unexplained phenomena and ghostly sightings floating through the local lore. Years ago, when I was dating my then-boyfriend, who would later become my ex-husband, he lived in a dingy basement apartment in one of these venerable homes. The apartment was a relic from a bygone era, damp and musty, with wallpaper peeling from the walls as though it were trying to escape the clutches of the persistent moisture. The previous tenant had resorted to nailing the wallpaper to the walls, an ill-fated attempt to halt the relentless decay. It was not the most inviting of places, but it had a certain eerie charm, an atmosphere that I, perhaps naively, found intriguing during those early weeks. For a while, everything seemed relatively normal. I would visit on weekends, and we would spend our time together attempting to ignore the oppressive gloom of the apartment. The old furniture, the creaky floors, and the persistent dampness were all part of its character, or so I told myself. However, one sunny afternoon, my perception of the place changed entirely, altering my view of the seemingly ordinary. On that particular day, I needed to use the bathroom, which was situated upstairs and shared among all the tenants. True to the nature of old houses, the bathroom was grimy and less than pleasant, but it was a necessity. As I made my way back down the narrow, creaky staircase, something unusual caught my eye. A man, dressed in a World War II air raid warden's uniform, was standing at the window on the first floor, intently observing the backyard. For those unfamiliar with the role, air raid wardens were courageous individuals who patrolled neighborhoods during air raids. Their duties included enforcing blackout regulations, ensuring residents took cover during bombings, and guiding people to safety. They performed these tasks after a full day's work, embodying a spirit of selflessness and bravery. The warden in question, however, appeared entirely out of place, as if he were an echo from the past. He was fixated on a small family playing in the garden, a father dressed in a naval officer's uniform, tossing a ball with his two young children while their mother watched with a gentle smile. The warden's face was a portrait of urgency and terror. He began shouting and banging on the window, desperately trying to alert the family to the danger. Suddenly, he turned away from the window, hurriedly climbing the stairs, and then he vanished. The only remnant of his presence was the echo of footsteps rapidly descending the stairs. Perplexed, I rushed to the window, expecting to see the family moving towards safety, but the garden was eerily silent. The once lively scene had vanished as abruptly as the warden himself. This spectral occurrence was not an isolated incident. Over the following weeks, the haunting scene repeated itself multiple times. Each time the same family appeared, and each time the warden's frantic efforts to save them were in vain. It was as though they were trapped in a nightmarish loop, forever reliving their final moments. The repetitive nature of these apparitions was both mesmerizing and chilling. Driven by a growing sense of curiosity and unease, I decided to investigate the history of the house. I visited the Maple Grove Public Library and delved into the local history archives. The research revealed a harrowing truth. During the war, a bomb had fallen on the house directly behind my ex's apartment. The family, who had been enjoying a rare moment of tranquility in their garden, was struck by the explosion. The ensuing debris and fire claimed their lives. The warden, who had been attempting to get them to safety, perished as well, tragically failing to save them. The weight of this tragedy was palpable every time I witnessed the haunting. Seeing the family in their last moments of joy, oblivious to the impending disaster, and the desperate warden, unable to change their fate, left me with an overwhelming sense of sorrow. Even now, years later, the memory brings tears to my eyes, a testament to the enduring emotional impact of the events. But the house harbored other mysteries beyond this tragic tale. There were other unexplained occurrences, other stories lurking in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. Those stories, however, are for another time. The haunting of the watchful warden and the vanished family remains a poignant reminder of the past's lingering presence in the present. Thank you for reading. If you have any questions about this haunting or would like to hear more, I'm happy to share. In the quiet, fog-draped town of Ravens Hollow, nestled in the rolling hills of the northeastern United States, Samuel Caldwell and his wife Evelyn were known for their deep and abiding love. Their home, a grand but aging Victorian house on the outskirts of town, had been their sanctuary for many years. The walls of their home bore witness to countless shared moments of joy, from laughter-filled evenings to quiet, intimate conversations. It was in this house that Samuel and Evelyn built their life together, each room a cherished reminder of their bond. Evelyn had always been the heart of their home, her laughter echoing through the halls and her presence making every corner of the house feel alive. Her sudden illness was a cruel twist of fate that left Samuel reeling. Despite their hopes and prayers, Evelyn's condition worsened rapidly, forcing her into an emergency surgical procedure at the local clinic, a modest facility struggling under the weight of its own inadequacies. The clinic, once a beacon of hope for the townsfolk, had recently been plagued by rumors of mismanagement and poor practices. The staff, though well-meaning, were overworked and under-resourced, their attention divided among a growing number of patients. Evelyn's surgery, meant to be a routine procedure, became a battleground of medical incompetence. The morning after the surgery, Samuel's world shattered. The doctors, with their faces grim and voices heavy, delivered the devastating news. Evelyn had passed away on the operating table. They also revealed that the baby she was carrying had not survived. Samuel was left to grapple with the enormity of his loss, his grief compounded by the cold efficiency of the medical staff. Their apologies seemed hollow, their reassurances meaningless in the face of his despair. The funeral was a somber affair, a poignant reminder of Evelyn's absence. Friends and family gathered to pay their respects, their sorrow mingling with Samuel's as they tried to find solace in the rituals of mourning. The cremation was performed with the formality of routine, but Samuel, consumed by grief and suspicion, couldn't shake the feeling that something was profoundly wrong. In the days following the cremation, Samuel decided to perform one final act of love for Evelyn. He wanted to scatter her ashes in the garden they had lovingly tended together, a place of beauty and peace that had once been their escape from the world's troubles. The garden, with its blooming flowers and carefully arranged pathways, was a testament to their shared dreams and happy moments. As Samuel carefully collected the ashes from the urn, he felt a mixture of reverence and anguish. Each handful of ashes represented a fragment of Evelyn, and he handled them with the utmost care. It was during this ritual of remembrance that he encountered something that would change everything. Amid the fine gray powder, Samuel's fingers brushed against something solid and metallic, His heart raced as he sifted through the ashes, revealing a small, rusty surgical blade. The sight of the blade sent a shiver down Samuel's spine. It was clear that the blade was old, its edges jagged and stained, a relic of the surgery that had taken Evelyn's life. The discovery was both horrifying and infuriating. How had this blade ended up among the ashes of his beloved wife? It was a disturbing sign of negligence, a tangible symbol of the suffering Evelyn had endured. Determined to uncover the truth, Samuel took the blade to the crematorium's manager, who was taken aback by the grim discovery. The facility, with its clinical sterility, offered no answers. Samuel's anguish turned to anger as he realized that the crematorium staff had likely been aware of the blade's presence but chose to ignore it. His efforts to get answers were met with evasiveness and excuses. Desperate for justice, Samuel approached the local authorities. He presented the blade as evidence of medical practice and demanded an investigation. The police, initially skeptical, were compelled to take action after Samuel's insistence and the mounting evidence of the clinic's failings. The investigation revealed a pattern of negligence and misconduct within the clinic and the crematorium. As the investigation unfolded, Samuel's home became a place of increasing unease. Strange occurrences began to disturb his nights: flickering lights, cold drafts, and eerie whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. The house, that once a haven, now felt like a prison of grief and dread. It was clear that Evelyn's spirit was restless, trapped between the worlds of the living and the dead. One night, Samuel was awoken by a chilling presence in their bedroom. The air grew colder, and a faint, sorrowful wail echoed through the room. He turned to see a ghostly figure materialize before him, a translucent form of Evelyn, her eyes filled with a haunting mixture of sorrow and anger. The apparition reached out to him, her spectral hand almost touching his face. Her presence was a desperate plea for justice and a reflection of the pain she had endured. The ghostly visitation was both terrifying and heart-wrenching. Samuel could feel Evelyn's anguish and frustration, and it became clear that her spirit was bound to the site of her suffering. He sought solace in local folklore, discovering that Ravens Hollow was home to a number of dark tales and ghostly legends. The town's history was riddled with accounts of medical malpractice and cover-ups, adding a chilling layer to Samuel's own experiences. The investigation into Evelyn's death uncovered a series of shocking revelations. The clinic had been implicated in multiple cases of neglect, and the crematorium had been operating with severe lapses in safety and oversight. The authorities took action, but the damage had already been done. Samuel's quest for justice led to legal actions against both the clinic and the crematorium, but the bureaucratic process was slow and fraught with obstacles. Despite the legal victories, Samuel could not escape the relentless haunting. The ghost of Evelyn remained a constant presence in the house, her spectral form a reminder of the love they had shared and the tragedy that had befallen them. The garden, once a place of beauty, became a memorial to Evelyn's suffering, a site of mourning and reflection. In Ravens Hollow, Samuel's story became a chilling legend, a cautionary tale of love, loss, and the haunting consequences of medical negligence. The tale served as a dark reminder of the thin line between life and death and the haunting legacy left behind when that line is crossed. Samuel's home remained a place of sorrow and spectral unrest, a testament to the enduring power of love and the pain of a life cut short. In the remote, mist-shrouded town of Maplewood, nestled deep in the forests of the Pacific Northwest, lived a man named Jonathan Archer. Jonathan was a solitary figure, known among the few who knew him for his eccentric passion, tarantulas. His home, an old Victorian house with creaking floors and drafty windows, was filled with terrariums housing various exotic spiders. Jonathan's obsession was with a particular species known as the marauders, an African breed of tarantulas, notorious for their intimidating appearance and formidable size. Jonathan's fascination with these creatures bordered on obsession. His collection was extensive, and he took meticulous care of his spiders. He bred marauders and spent countless hours tending to them. Despite his deep-seated fear of spiders, which began in his childhood, Jonathan felt a profound sense of responsibility for these creatures. His fear manifested as nightmares and sweaty awakenings, but he remained committed to his arachnid companions. One day, Jonathan's prized marauder, a female tarantula named Matilda, whom he had raised for 18 years, gave birth to a new batch of spiderlings. This was a significant event, as female tarantulas typically outlive their male counterparts, and Matilda's long life had been marked by numerous successful births. However, tragedy struck when Matilda, after protecting her eggs with a webbed cocoon, passed away, leaving her offspring vulnerable. Jonathan was devastated by Matilda's death. Her loss was compounded by the poor health of the newborn spiderlings. Despite his initial despair, Jonathan decided to preserve Matilda's body, planning to create a specimen for his collection. The dead spiderlings were incinerated to prevent any potential contamination. As part of his preservation process, Jonathan placed Matilda's body in the freezer for a few days to eliminate any potential living organisms. That night, while cleaning the kitchen, he noticed a strange white blur in the corner of his eye. It looked like a spider with long legs, but Jonathan's tarantulas were never white. Perplexed, he tried to catch what he thought might be an escapee, but it disappeared before he could get a clear look. The experience left him feeling unsettled. The next day, Jonathan proceeded with his task. He carefully cleaned Matilda's body and prepared for dissection. To his astonishment, as he began to cut into the abdomen, he noticed an unusual movement. The abdomen seemed to pulse and shift as if it were alive. Jonathan, despite his scientific mind, felt a chill run down his spine. He dismissed the possibility of gases as the movements were too deliberate and consistent. With a mix of apprehension and curiosity, Jonathan continued his work. To his shock, he discovered 3 live spiderlings inside Matilda's abdomen. This was an extraordinary and baffling find, as spiderlings, once hatched, should not remain inside their mother's body. Jonathan carefully removed the spiderlings and placed them in small capsules, marking them for any potential research on parasites or germs. As Jonathan pondered the significance of his discovery, strange occurrences began to unfold in his home. Objects moved on their own, shadows danced in the corners of his vision, and a cold, eerie presence seemed to linger in the air. Jonathan's once safe haven now felt like a place of unease. The manifestations were subtle at first, unexplained noises, flickering lights, but they grew more intense over time. One night, Jonathan was woken by a chilling draft and the sound of skittering legs. He saw a ghostly apparition of Matilda, her spectral form hovering above her old terrarium. Her eyes, glowing with a faint, mournful light, seemed to follow Jonathan's every move. The ghostly Matilda was a heartbreaking sight, her presence a mix of sorrow and defiance. It was as if she were still trying to protect her last brood, even in death. Jonathan's investigation into the hauntings led him to delve into local folklore. He discovered that Maplewood had a history of eerie occurrences linked to the spirits of creatures, particularly those with long lifespans. Tales of animal spirits lingering to protect their young or seek justice for their untimely deaths were not uncommon. Determined to find answers, Jonathan consulted with a local paranormal expert, Dr. Eliza Moore, who specialized in spiritual phenomena involving animals. Dr. Moore explained that some creatures, especially those with deep emotional bonds, could leave behind powerful residual energies. The spirit of Matilda, she suggested, might be lingering due to her strong protective instincts for her offspring. As the weeks passed, the haunting grew more intense. Jonathan's home became a place of spectral activity, strange noises, cold spots, and apparitions of Matilda's ghost. The once comforting presence of his tarantulas now felt ominous, as if their protective spirits were watching over Jonathan's every move. The ghost of Matilda appeared in various places. By the terrarium, in the garden where her ashes were scattered, and even in Jonathan's dreams. Desperate for relief, Jonathan organized a ritual with Dr. Moore to help Matilda's spirit find peace. They performed a cleansing ceremony in the house, focusing on the areas most affected by the haunting. During the ritual, Jonathan spoke to Matilda's spirit, acknowledging her protective nature and the significance of her sacrifice. The ceremony seemed to bring a sense of calm, and the ghostly manifestations gradually subsided. Jonathan, though still haunted by the memories of his experiences, found solace in knowing that Matilda's spirit had finally been set free. The tarantulas in his care continued to thrive, and Jonathan's home, though still marked by its eerie past, returned to a semblance of normalcy. The tale of Jonathan Archer and his haunted tarantula became a legend in Maplewood, a spine-chilling story of love, loss, and the haunting legacy of a devoted mother. The once feared spiders now symbolized a powerful bond that transcended death, a reminder of the deep emotional connections that could linger long after life had ended. I remember it like it was yesterday, the day that irrevocably altered the course of my life. It was one of those radiant summer days when the sky seemed impossibly blue and the world felt full of endless possibilities. As I stepped out the front door, the warmth of the sun enveloped me, and a sense of optimism filled the air. I walked toward the carport, ready to embrace the day, when something unexpected made my heart plummet. Across the street, I spotted a familiar figure, someone I had known since childhood. It was David, my neighbor, walking down the road with a demeanor that seemed out of place. There was something different about him. He appeared disoriented, if he were wandering through a dream. His usually bright eyes looked distant, and his once energetic gait was now slow and uncertain. But then he caught my eye and gave a small, almost wistful smile, his hand raised in a casual wave. At that moment, a jarring realization hit me. David had been taken away in an ambulance just the day before. I had witnessed the frantic scene from my window, his father screaming for help, the flashing lights of the emergency vehicles. I had been deeply concerned, wondering what could have happened to him. Yet here he was, strolling down the street as if nothing had occurred. Overwhelmed with relief and curiosity, I dashed inside to tell my mother. Her reaction, however, was immediate and chilling. Her face fell, and she looked at me with a mixture of sorrow and disbelief. "That can't be," she said softly. "I just spoke with his father. David passed away about 5 minutes ago." Time seemed to freeze. The world around me blurred as the enormity of her words sank in. Just the previous day, David was alive, and now he was gone. It was like a cruel trick of fate, a nightmarish illusion that I couldn't escape. As I tried to process the news, a wave of guilt washed over me. If only I had known, I thought, I would have visited him one last time. Instead, I had simply waved and continued with my day, oblivious to the finality of the situation. The knowledge that my last interaction with him was so trivial felt unbearable. That day marked the beginning of an unsettling shift in my perspective, a poignant reminder that life is fleeting and that every moment with loved ones is precious. In the weeks that followed, the haunting echoes of that day lingered. Every time I saw someone walking down the street, David's image seemed to merge with the shadows, a poignant reminder of the fleeting nature of life. I began to experience eerie incidents that left me questioning reality. I would occasionally catch glimpses of David in the corners of my vision, his figure shimmering like a mirage before vanishing when I turned my head. Objects in my house, like picture frames and books, would move on their own, and the temperature in certain rooms would drop inexplicably. One particularly chilling night, I woke to the sound of footsteps echoing through my hallway. The sound was unmistakable, heavy, deliberate steps as if someone were walking with purpose. I ventured into the hallway, my heart pounding, but found nothing out of place. The next morning, I discovered that the framed photograph of David and me, which had always hung on the wall of my bedroom, had been turned face down. I felt an unsettling presence, as if David's spirit was trying to communicate something. Determined to find answers, I sought the help of a local medium named Helena Winters. Helena was renowned for her ability to communicate with the deceased and provide closure to grieving families. During our session, Helena described an overwhelming sense of sadness and regret emanating from David's spirit. She explained that David's spirit was trapped between realms, confused by the abrupt transition from life to death, and distressed by the unresolved nature of his final moments. Helena suggested that David's spirit might be trying to reach out due to unfinished business or a need for closure. In an attempt to uncover more, Helena performed a spiritual reading of my home. She mentioned feeling a strong presence in the living room where David and I had spent many hours together. The energy was intense, filled with unresolved emotions. Helena also noted a specific cold spot near the front window where David had been seen walking on that fateful day. She believed this was a focal point for his spirit's unrest. Helena recommended performing a ritual to help David's spirit find peace. We organized a gathering of close friends and family, including David's father, to participate in the ceremony. The ritual took place in my living room, which had become the epicenter of the haunting activities. We lit candles and arranged them in a circle, placing photographs of David and other personal items in the center as symbols of remembrance. We recited prayers and shared stories of David's life, focusing on the positive memories and his impact on those around him. During the ceremony, an unexpected event occurred. As we spoke about David's life, a sudden gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing several candles. The temperature dropped sharply, and the room filled with a palpable sense of energy. It felt as though David's spirit was present, responding to the ritual. Helena guided us through the remainder of the ceremony with a calming presence, helping to channel the energy and direct it toward finding peace. After the ritual, I noticed a profound change. The haunting occurrences in my home began to subside. The strange noises, cold spots, and fleeting glimpses of David's figure became rare. The atmosphere in the house shifted from one of unease to a more serene environment. It was as though David's spirit had finally been able to move on, finding the closure it needed. Despite the resolution, the experience left a lasting impact on me. I became more attuned to the fragility of life and the importance of cherishing every moment with those we love. The memory of David's spirit became a poignant reminder of the deep connections we share with others and the significance of saying our goodbyes with meaning. David's story evolved into a local legend, a tale of love, loss, and the echoes of a final farewell. His spirit, once restless, symbolized a bond that transcended the boundaries of life and death, a testament to the enduring connections we have with those we hold dear. The experience taught me that even in the face of tragedy, there is beauty in the memories we create and the love we share, which can offer solace and understanding long after we part ways. A few days after my grandfather passed away, I found myself lying in bed next to my younger sister, Lily. We were spending the night in the old house on Madison Lane, where my grandfather had lived and where he had died. The atmosphere was thick with grief, but the comforting glow of the TV offered some distraction. Lily was fast asleep, her gentle breathing a steady rhythm that contrasted with the tension I felt. I was engrossed in a Spanish telenovela, the dramatic dialogue filling the room, but something strange caught my attention. It started as a flicker, a brief flash of light from the kitchen area, just beyond the door. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but as I squinted into the darkness, the light became more pronounced, a narrow beam, like that from a flashlight, cutting through the gloom. Confusion and fear gripped me as I strained to see where it was coming from. My heart began to race when I realized there were two dark figures in the kitchen. One was tall and impossibly thin, while the other was short and round. The taller figure was clutching a large kitchen knife, and the shorter one held the flashlight that illuminated their unsettling presence. Panic surged through me, and I instinctively closed my eyes, hoping that when I opened them, the figures would be gone, nothing more than a figment of my imagination. But when I dared to peek, they were still there, their outlines sharp against the darkness. They hadn't moved, but their menacing stance suggested they were aware of me. Trembling, I tried to rouse Lily without making any noise that could draw the figure's attention. My heart sank as she remained deeply asleep, oblivious to the growing danger. Terrified, I ducked under the blanket, as if that flimsy shield could protect me from whatever malevolent force had invaded our home. Minutes passed, each one stretching into an eternity. My pulse pounded in my ears, and I debated whether to peek again. When I finally mustered the courage, I cautiously lifted the blanket, keeping my eyes closed until the last second. But when I looked, the figures were even closer. A cold dread washed over me. I could now see them more clearly, or rather, I could see what they weren't. Their bodies had no skin, no clothes, nothing human about them. They were like living shadows, dense and impenetrable as if made of some dark, ethereal mist. I closed my eyes tightly, praying for them to disappear, but when I opened them again, they had drawn even nearer. I repeated this desperate act several more times, each time hoping they would vanish, but they only continued their slow, inevitable advance. My breath caught in my throat as they finally stood over me, towering, formless, and utterly terrifying. I could feel their oppressive presence, a suffocating weight that made it hard to breathe. Their faces, or where faces should have been, loomed over me, empty and void as if they were peering into my very soul. In a final, frantic act of desperation, I screamed as loud as I could. The sound tore through the silence of the night, and with it, the figures vanished as if they had never been there. The door burst open, and my dad rushed into the room, his face full of concern. He demanded to know what had happened, and I tearfully recounted the horrifying vision of the two dark figures that seemed intent on killing me. His response was calm, perhaps too calm. He assured me it was just a bad dream, a manifestation of the stress and grief I was feeling after my grandfather's death. But I knew what I had seen was real. The memory of the flashlight still burned in my mind, the cold, hard evidence that something was indeed there. I pointed to the spot where I had first seen the light, asking him if he could see it too. But he couldn't. He dismissed it as a trick of the mind, something my eyes had conjured in the darkness. Still shaken, he led me and Lily to his bedroom where he hoped I would feel safer. But sleep eluded me that night, my mind replaying the terrifying events over and over. The next morning, when I finally managed to doze off, I woke with a strange sensation on my cheek. My hand instinctively reached up to touch the spot, and that's when I noticed them. 3 dark fingerprints, faint but unmistakable, pressed into my skin. I stared at them in disbelief, my heart pounding once more as the implications of those marks sunk in. I hadn't noticed them the night before, and yet here they were, physical proof of an encounter I desperately wished had never happened. The following days brought a series of unsettling incidents that only deepened my conviction that something unnatural had taken root in our home. It started with the lights. They would flicker inexplicably, plunging the house into brief moments of darkness. And in those moments, I would feel it. A presence, cold and watchful, just beyond my sight. My dad checked the wiring multiple times, but everything seemed in order, leaving us with no rational explanation. One night, as I was brushing my teeth, the bathroom mirror began to fog over, despite the fact that the water wasn't running hot. Slowly, words started to appear on the glass, as if someone was writing from the other side. "I'm here," it read, the letters forming in the mist with an eerie clarity. I stumbled back, my heart racing, but when I looked again, the words had disappeared, leaving the mirror clear and spotless. Another evening, Lily and I were playing in the living room when the temperature suddenly dropped. It was as if a cold wind had swept through the room, though the windows were tightly shut. Lily, oblivious to the change, continued playing, but I felt a familiar chill settle over me. From the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of a shadow moving across the wall, too fast and too large to be from anything inside the room. When I turned to face it, the shadow darted away, disappearing into the far corner where the light didn't reach. Desperate for answers, I confided in my best friend Sarah, who suggested we do some research on the house. We spent hours digging through old records at the local library, uncovering a history that made my blood run cold. The house on Madison Lane had a dark past, one that was carefully omitted from the stories passed down in my family. Decades ago, it had been the scene of a double murder. A man, distraught over the death of his wife, had killed his 2 children in a fit of madness before taking his own life. The gruesome act had taken place in the very kitchen where I had seen the figures. The more I learned, the more the pieces began to fit together. The descriptions of the man and his children matched the figures I had seen, tall and thin, short and round. It was as if the horrors of that night had imprinted themselves on the house, a haunting that was now reaching out to me. The realization was both terrifying and tragic, and I wondered if my grandfather's death had somehow stirred these spirits from their restless slumber. Determined to bring peace to our home, I reached out to a local paranormal investigator, Miss Evelyn Marsh. She was known in town for her expertise in dealing with hauntings and had helped several families rid their homes of unwelcome spirits. Miss Marsh arrived at our house with an array of tools, EMF meters, thermal cameras, and other equipment designed to detect and communicate with the supernatural. She conducted a thorough investigation, moving through each room methodically. In the kitchen, where the figures had appeared, the EMF meter spiked dramatically, and the temperature dropped by several degrees. Miss Marsh decided to conduct a seance, hoping to contact the spirits and help them find peace. We gathered around the kitchen table, the air thick with tension and anticipation. She began by speaking softly, asking the spirits to make their presence known. The room grew colder still, and the flickering candles cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. Suddenly, the room plunged into darkness, and a series of loud, echoing knocks reverberated through the kitchen. My breath caught in my throat as I felt a cold hand brush against my arm. Miss Marsh continued to speak, her voice calm and steady, urging the spirits to move on to find the light. The knocks grew louder, more insistent, until they abruptly stopped, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. For a moment, everything was still. Then, one by one, the candles went out, leaving us in complete darkness. The seance had an effect. After that night, the occurrences became less frequent. The shadows, the cold spots, and the eerie noises gradually faded, tamed though I could never quite shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The house on Madison Lane returned to a semblance of normalcy, but the memory of those dark figures, the fingerprints on my cheek, and the chilling history of the house lingered. Even now, years later, the events of those days are etched in my mind. The experience taught me that some places hold on to their past, and some spirits are not easily laid to rest. The house may be quiet now, but I'll never forget the night the shadows came to life and the terrifying presence that once haunted the corners of our home. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like, comment, and share the video. See you next time.